Ahoy, and welcome back to Titanic Talkline. My name is Alexia. That has yet to change. Nobody has managed to come in and mutiny me out of the show. And if they do, I fully expect you all to hunt them down and avenge me. But this week, the person who's obviously going to be leading the charge, if that happens, I'm really excited to have, I believe it's called Ships of Station, or is it Ship of Stations? I've gotten it backwards. Which is it,
Uh,
Carrie?
Ships of State Studio.
Good God. It's neither of those. Great. Thank you. I All right, let's start over again. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the talk line. I fucked up my guest's info once more. I'm sorry about that, Carrie. It is Kerry McCoy from
Good.
Ships of State Studios. Hello, if I got
Hello.
it right. How goes it?
Oh, pretty good. Um, Pretty windy here, so it's kind of
Is it really?
yeah. I've just been kind of just yeah. I've been running around all day, running errands. So it's been, and then now I'm here. So it's been a pretty
I
crazy day for me.
mean, every once in a while things just
So
have to get a little wild. So I
yeah, that's true.
I'm
Life.
currently sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I
No, you're
just
all
your
right.
website.
I was just gonna say,
Mhm.
yeah, I was just gonna say that life wouldn't be interesting otherwise. You gotta have a little bit of craziness here and there.
Yeah, otherwise it's just like I don't know, not worth it, I guess.
Yeah.
A
Pretty,
boring
pretty
thing.
boring. Be pretty boring.
It really is. So I Nope, I'm going to ask you my normal question first. So I always ask everybody when I bring them onto my show, sort of, what is your Titanic story? So, Carrie, what is your Titanic story, if you have one?
Oh, definitely. Well, it started when I was about from first I remember my first exposure to Titanic was I was 10 years old. It was my 10th birthday, and my parents got me a model kit and the book on Titanic. And it was the old Revell um 570 scale model, if you know what I'm talking about.
I'm about to Google it.
It's been around for quite some time, but they got me that, and then they got me the book Titanic and Her Sisters, Olympic and Britannic by McCluskey, Marriott, and Sharp.
Hmm.
Um, it's a decent book. To be, if I'm completely honest, there are some inaccuracies in there, but if anything, it's a really good photographic reference for me, especially with my artwork. So, and I've had it all these years, and I still have it on my shelf. And that's it's been oh, how long has that been? It's about like 23 years. So,
It hasn't been
but
84 years.
man, sometimes it kind of does feel like it. But but yeah, and then from there, it just kind of took off from there. I started getting books from the library. Dr. Ballard's books like Discovery of the Titanic, and then um, Don Lynch's Titanic and Illustrated History, and that's where and being the artistic sort, it runs in the family. I get it from my mom. She was an artist, and seeing Ken Marshall's paintings, and just it just inspired me. And his artwork has been my probably my biggest inspiration over the years as a growing and aspiring artist. And so, I even today I use a lot of his paintings as like references and for like detail work and stuff like that, because I know they're very highly accurate. And he's done years and years of research. Um, and then that just kind of branched off into some other things, like into the world of transatlantic liners in general, and then even into warships with Bob Bauer's Discovery of the Bismarck, and just getting in just that kind of stuff. So Titanic really, um, for me, really opened the door to just a huge world, and it's 23 years. It's really been fun, and it's something I'm going to enjoy the whole rest of my life. So that's kind of my just briefly, that's just kind of my story of how I got started with Titanic. So,
You talked a little bit about your art in there, which is kind of your primary focus right now. And I'm looking at your website,
uh-huh,
and you do these really beautiful black and gray, highly detailed paintings or
uh-huh.
illustrations. I don't know how to do how would you describe them? One and two, what medium are you using? Is this pencil? Is this
Yep.
charcoal?
Yeah,
Wow.
this is their graphite pencil, graphite powder. Um, is the medium. And yeah, it I really like I said, Ken's paintings have been my biggest inspiration. And so because of his paintings being so incredibly highly detailed, that's what I strive for in mine is I strive for high level detail, while still keeping it pretty realistic and high level of accuracy. Um, but yeah, and so as a result, as you can imagine, they take quite a bit of time just to complete one of them. And because I have a full-time job, this is kind of like a side thing. So as far as time to actually draw for me, it's kind of like mainly on the weekends is when I really have the time to do it. So for me to actually complete one from start to finish, it can probably take about a couple months total to get there before it's finally done. But when it's all kind of clumped together, each one it's about like this last one I just finished, which is actually on my homepage. It's called Almost Home. It shows Olympic on her return maiden voyage from New York. It's July 4th, 1911. And off in the distance, just to the right of center, just to the right of the bow, you look way off in the distance, you can see something just on the horizon there. That's Bishop Rock Lighthouse on the Isles of Scilly. And at this point, she's 4 hours from completing her maiden voyage. But that drawing, I actually timed myself on that one, and it took me about 115 hours to from start to finish on that one.
Wow.
So it's so they each one is definitely 100 hours or more into each one of them.
And that's not 100 hours of continuous labor either, as you were discussing. Like anytime you make any kind of art thing, that's I don't know. Well, it's impossible to sit down for 150 hours. That's just not going to happen. But
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it takes longer than that in a sense because that's just as you pointed out the time you're actively spent drawing. That's not including like researching, referencing another detail, finding the
Right,
time. Oh, I
right.
lost my eraser. Finding the eraser.
Yep.
Princess
Yeah.
for real.
But but yeah, no, yeah, you're exactly right. It's like, that's just literally just like drawing and then, just looking at my immediate references that I have right there next to me that I'm using right then. This isn't counting like, having to get up and grab out some other books, trying to do some more or like research online or, asking some of the other historians out there. There are a couple out there that have helped me a lot with with my work. So yeah, it doesn't even count all that, and that's gosh, I don't even know how many hours that is. That is just by itself, but it's got to be at least that again, if I had to guess.
It's a lot of time is basically what I'm trying to get into because I'm looking at
Mm-hmm.
your I have Almost Home open right now on your homepage and it's
Uh-huh.
letting me zoom in pretty close. I mean,
Uh-huh.
obviously I don't have the original painting in front of me. I can't put my face in.
Right, right.
But
Yeah.
zooming in, I mean, Carrie, these details are gorgeous. You can see every single one of the rigging wires, but you're able to get that sort of graduated stroke that shows that so the cables are fading in and out of the smoke. There's just a lot of really, really gorgeous detail that
Mm-hmm.
when you're making, if you're not an artist, and I'm not a great artist, like I like to draw here and there, but it's hard to
Uh-huh.
understand all of the different like time, effort, and techniques that go into making something like this. Like I can't. There's a countless number of different techniques that go into making the smoke gradation look different from the gradation shine on the top of the funnels, and then from the steam. That I'm just looking at this right now, and it's like that must just take so much time to get right.
It in some aspects it really does. There's some things like especially with the rigging and stuff. Sometimes that'll take me one of those lines will take me like a couple tries to get it right because it's like sometimes I'll straight edge them, but I know that they weren't they definitely weren't pulled taut at all. They had to have some slack because of the flexing and bending of the ship. So I try to do that as much as possible, and especially with some of those longer ones like the Marconi aerials going between the masts. Those, yeah, those are pretty tricky to do freehand. Those sometimes take a couple tries to get right, and it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes, I'll be honest. But but yeah, I've got there's like a bunch of different tools I use. Obviously, it's not just the pencils. I got like a couple different kinds of erasers. One of the ones I have, which I actually just got recently, just picked it up for a few bucks at the hobby store. One of those electric erasers, and man, that I got it and I started using it. I'm like, why have I not used this until now? Where have I been? Because it's allowed me to get such small details, like for example, in the bow wave. Like you look at the bow wave, you see like some of the little spray dots in there, like in the wake and stuff like that, like kind of the foam like webbing in there. That's how I was able to do it with that, and I couldn't do it with anything else I have. So for me, when I did that, it was just really exciting. Just discovered, a new way to to do some of this to really bring out the high level of detail that I strive for in my work. So,
New tools really do help, even if like technically you could get the same result with an old tool. The point is
hmm
that maybe you haven't learned how to do that with that tool, and sometimes you need something else. And I have an electric razor just because I have wrist pain, and sometimes it was annoying when I'd make a million mistakes and then have to go do a ton of erasing. And it is
right.
so easy, especially with like a big long line to just be like, "Brrr."
Yep. 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 So you kind of know where I'm coming from on
I do. It's not to say that
that
you can't do stuff without it, but like, man, doesn't it help sometimes?
one. Right. Right. Uh,
So when you're sitting down and thinking, I'm going to draw something like the Edmund Fitzgerald or the Olympic, first of all, those are
uh-huh.
two extremely detailed ships. Where do you even start? Because it's not just, the big shape of it. It's as I've been, going over and over and over and complimenting, it's every little detail here. Like you have one little swung out lifeboat, there's a shadow there.
Yep. It okay, so as far as my process goes, when I start, I first I'll just get this really cool idea. This really cool idea. And I'm like, yeah, I don't it's like, man, that's really cool. And I'm like, well, wait, has someone else done something like it? And usually, I just do like a quick search and don't really come up with anything, because obviously I don't want to plagiarize another artist or anything like that. And so then it's like, okay, once I know I'm good there, then it's like, all right. So then I start kind of picturing it in my mind, like creating the scene, the picture in my mind. And a lot of artists will sketch it out first, just do like a rough preliminary, and sometimes even multiple preliminary sketches to get their idea firmly down on paper. Honestly, I really don't do that. I really just go off of what I have in my mind. Um, so what some people probably don't know about me is I am autistic, and I do know that some autistic people really seem to have, I've noticed, seem to really have a gift for for things kind of like this, like kind of like what I do. And they really seem to be able to have a vision of some things. Um, and so I get the image in my mind, and then I'm like, okay. So then I start actually doing my research. Like another thing I try to do, like in the case of Almost Home, is it's a scene that you know is probably not. really, like, as far as I know, there isn't like another painting or a drawing or anything like that of that particular moment in time. And so I try to go for something that's really unique, like really unique, something that maybe a lot of people don't really know about in that particular moment that shifts history. And and so then I start doing the research. Um, like in the case of this one, I was like, okay, because this is an actual moment in time. This is something that actually happened. I want to try and get it as accurate as possible. So I was like, okay, I need to know what the weather was like that day and at that time. I need to know what the weather was like, what the state of the ocean was like. And I was able to contact a very nice gentleman from the Titanic Historical Society Advisory Board. And he was able to definitively answer that question for me. And he helped me out with some of the other aspects of the piece. And so then I get that figured out. I was like, okay, so then how far away was she from the light? And so that's when I went doing a little bit more digging. Encyclopedia Titanica has an article by Mark Chirnside and Sam Halpern called Maiden Voyage Mysteries. You'd probably know what article I'm referring to if you've read it. Um,
I've seen it.
yeah, it's a very good article, and it has like the log cards for Olympics and like especially Olympics maiden crossing both directions. Um, and so they have like the geographical coordinates in there as well. So I'm like, okay. So I look at it's like, okay, this was where Olympic was. So I take that coordinate. And then it's like, okay, so where's the lighthouse located? So I take those coordinates and I determine, okay, it's about 6 miles, about 6 miles apart. And then I was like, well, considering where the viewer is at in the drawing, even though they're elevated above the surface of the ocean a little bit, 6 miles, you'd probably barely be able to see the top of that lighthouse over the horizon. So in that situation, that's one of those times where an artist has to take some license, have to take just a little bit of artistic license. So I did that to make it so that the lighthouse is a little bit more visible and it's a little more obvious what it is. It doesn't just look like I don't know, just like a rock out there in the middle of the ocean or something like that. Um, so um, so yeah, just stuff like that. Have to research all this, and then just the process of just putting it all together on the paper. And for me personally, probably the most one of the most satisfying things about completing a piece is when it turns out exactly how I pictured it in my mind, exactly how I saw it, and I look at it and I'm like, that turned out just how I wanted it. It's just a really cool feeling, and there's really nothing like it. So that's kind of just a little bit of my process. But yeah, there's a lot of research involved in some of these. Some of them, it's a little more like art, a little more artistic, where it's not necessarily an exact point in time, like an exact event or something like that. Like in the case of my drawing Honor and Glory.
I was just about
Um,
to ask about Honor and Glory. I have that open on my
yeah,
computer.
yeah. That one, while it does show her, it shows her in the late morning of the 14th, so about 12 hours before her fatal encounter with the iceberg. Um, at the same time, because it's mid-ocean, so there's really no landmarks around or anything like that. Just a little bit of research I had to do was just the kind of what the weather was kind of like at that point in time. But other than that, um, like for example, the flags on the tops of the masts. I actually learned fairly recently that in real life, the flag on the open ocean, the flags wouldn't be flying from the masts. The only flag that the ship would be flying would be the ensign at the jackstaff on the stern.
Right, right,
Um,
right. Huh.
but but again, you see a lot of paintings of the ship at sea with flags on it. So it's like, well, and I'm going to realize it's like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just that's completely artistic. Artistic license, it does really add to it really does add to the piece as well. So of course that was I learned that well after I did that drawing. So it's like, oh, okay, I just got to the point where it's like, I can deal with it. I tend to be pretty perfectionist, really more so when I was younger. But as I've gotten older and I've learned some things, I'm just, um, and just some of the experience you get as you age, it's just kind of like, some things I just kind of look at it as like, you know what? It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It's a work of art. It's not a photograph of the real thing, and it's definitely not like a plan or anything like that. And so I'm learning to be like, you know what? I'm okay with that.
I
I
think
did
that's
the very
healthy.
best I could. And yeah, and I feel like all in all, I did a pretty good job and came pretty close to it, even if there's just a couple of just little things that ultimately just it doesn't really matter that much. So, but that's just a little bit of kind of how I approach each of my works.
Well, you said you found out about the flags after the fact. When you're doing your research on, drawing Titanic, whether it's Honor and Glory or the other one that I can't remember the name of, but um, what are some of the facts or interesting things that you found out about during the process of your research that you wouldn't have considered? Because, I know that you're not particularly looking at like the construction of the engine room. You're not drawing the engine room. You're going to be focused on the exterior appearance, which I sometimes think maybe we don't pay attention to that much. It didn't contribute to
Right.
the story, so
Right. Um, let me see if I understand your question correctly. Um,
sure,
would you mind kind of rephrasing it if you
no
don't mind?
problem. You were mentioning all the research that you do when you're making your drawings. I was wondering what
Uh-huh.
you thought were some of the more interesting things that you found during your research, particularly about Titanic when you were having a poke around the world, the books, the internet.
Um, well, I there's been a few just little things I've learned, and even not necessarily pertaining to the piece I'm working on, but it'll probably, aid me with another one later on, you know,
Sure.
there in my knowledge bank. The flag, like I said, the flags were kind of a big one for me. And so then I was, man, I see all these paintings with ships with flags flying in an ocean. Man, that's not quite right. But then, like I said, it's like, oh well, that's just an artistic touch. That's just an artistic license. It just made it really adds to the whole. So that was kind of a big one for me, and that's why I didn't draw them almost home. You don't see them on the mast, but you can just see the blue duster at the stern, just barely. And kind of a funny thing about that was I had already drawn the White Star Burgee on the mainmast, and it was so perfect. I had done it so perfectly, and I was so proud of it. And then I found out about that. I'm like, oh, I was kind of bummed to be honest. I was like, because I'm trying to make it as accurate as possible. I was like, well, that wouldn't be there then. So as much as I hated to, I had taken a picture of it though before I erased it, so at least I have it still.
Right.
But yeah, that
Uh,
was like I said, that was one of the bigger ones for me. Excuse me. Um, and then again, just some just nothing really like major per se. A
sure.
lot of these any major things, like any major differences between like the three sisters are, for a lot of us that are really into them are pretty obvious.
Sure.
And but it's just some of the little things, and it's those little things that I just keep learning about. It's like I'm learning something new every day. It's just some of these little technical things. Um, just as an example, and again, it doesn't necessarily apply to any of my drawings I've done up to this point,
Nobody
but
cares. Tell me anyway.
the main, but in this case, the main ship's bell, the 25-inch bell that was mounted at the base of the foremast on the Olympic class ships, um, what I didn't know until just recently was that each one of the three ships had that bell mounted in a different spot on the mast.
Huh.
Um, oh, yeah, Titanic's was mounted on the back, so it was like facing towards the bridge.
Sure.
Olympics was on the front, and Britannic actually had hers mounted to the starboard side of the mast.
Hmm.
So it's just kind of a little one of those little interesting things that they did. I don't
Did
know
it?
why they did it
Oh,
like
all right.
that,
You
but
answered my question. I was going to say, did it say why?
I don't know. But I have noticed it seems um from stuff I've seen, it seems that where the bell would be mounted on the back or even on the front, it seemed pretty close proximity to some of the steam winches there on the forecastle deck. And so it would
Hmm.
seem like it might be kind of, kind of hard to, kind of awkward trying to get to it,
That's
So
fair.
maybe, maybe that's why on Britannic, the last one, maybe they mounted it to the side, so it was, it's just easier to get to. Um, but that's again, that's just speculation. I don't know if that's actually the case or not, um, but yeah, like I said, it's just a lot of the things I learned that I pick up these days are just little things, little tiny details that may play out in future drawings. But if not, then it's just one of those things I have had back there in the back of my head, and it's just again, you know what they say, knowledge is power.
Right.
So,
Hmm. I mean, I
um,
have a bunch of quote unquote useless little facts. Like anybody that will let me corner them into a conversation will find out about what the floor in the first class dining room is made out of because I'm just going to tell them that it's linoleum. Because
right,
I have nothing
right.
better to do with my time than surprise people with random facts. But they're interesting things to know.
Oh yeah, and I mean for those of us that are just really into it, it's like Titanic and like these other ships, they're kind of like our world, really.
Yeah.
And so, for us, there's nothing like weird or misunderstandable about that. But a lot of people honestly would probably look at someone like me because I do geek out sometimes, and they're just kind of looking at me like, man, you're kind of weird, or I may not necessarily say it that way. I've just kind of learned to be like, okay, that's you can think what you want, but that's me in a nutshell. So,
Well, there's a lot of people who have interest in different maritime things, not just Titanic. I mean, Titanic is a big one, but there's a lot of
oh
interest
yeah,
in the maritime world. It is fascinating. And, up until the 50s or 60s, for hundreds and hundreds of years, steamboat travel and ocean travel in general was the primary method of moving anything, including
right,
people from country to country. You couldn't just hop a plane. It wasn't available in that way for several decades more.
right. But yeah, yeah, no, that's absolutely true. But yeah, one with the advent of the jetliner in the 50s, from that point, the golden age of transatlantic travel by passenger ship was pretty much that was like the death knell for them, sadly. But it's just as sad as it is, technology keeps advancing, and things just like travel gets easier and faster, and because uh, ships cross the ocean in like 4 days, 4 or 5 days,
Right.
and you know plane cut that down to a matter of hours. So yeah, that's so it's pretty understandable. That's a pretty big deal. Everyone's like, oh yeah, this is the way to go now. And so then from there, just the transatlantic liners just kind of faded into history. It's kind of sad, but it's just time moves on, technology advances. So
There's also you notice the difference, and I talk about it a couple times, and just sort of the way there was a shift in travel sort of around this time, necessitated by Germany entering the steamship race with a big bang. And they kind of forced the United Kingdom and sort of anyone else who was making ships to be like, we gotta up our game. And
right,
Mauritania and Lusitania, Titanic, Olympic, and Britannic were sort of the UK's answer to that to that race flag. And
Right, right,
they really doubled down. Cunard was like, well, we're gonna be speed and luxury, but a focus on speed. And White Star was like, we're gonna be speed and luxury with a focus on luxury.
right.
And it's just really interesting to see how the design and shipbuilding, first of all, it varied a lot between just Mauritania and Lusitania and then the Olympic classes. But then you look at, say, and this is not meant to sound critical of the company I'm about to name, but you look at, say, a Virgin Cruise Line ship and this
Uh-huh.
design and
Right,
the necessity and the necessities of its passengers and the aesthetic of the times. It is so interesting how everything has changed from, hey, look at this brand new concept of us offering hot food on a ship, to now it's like, if you didn't have hot food on a ship, no one's getting the hell on.
right. That's true. And that's kind of interesting that you bring that up. There's just a couple little things about that came to mind. Like you were talking about, just some of the little differences, noticeable differences between Mauritania and Lusitania.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that was, part of that, Leonard Pesquet, Cunard's chief naval architect, obviously he designed them as well as Aquitania. But
Which I keep forgetting about
uh
because the other two are just so much more interesting and
yeah,
important. Poor Aquitania.
right. Yeah, well, they were built as sisters, as like direct running mates, sisters to each other. Aquitania obviously didn't come until 7 years later, and she was built as more, not so much a sister, but as a running mate, so for
Right.
their weekly service. Um, but the uh my understanding is that part of the reason for some of the differences between Lusitania and Mauritania is the fact that they were built in two different locations.
Which is
Um,
so cool.
Mauritania was built, yeah, right. So it was just kind of those shipyard work or those shipyard draftsmen, architects, or whatever, whoever was working there. It was kind of their take on the basic original concept um, that Pascal drew up. King was built at um, Swan and Newcastle, and
Sorry, you broke
Lusitania
up.
was
You
built
broke up.
at John.
Sorry, Carrie, you broke up quite a fair bit there. So could you repeat the last few sentences just so that everyone can hear?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. If it might be my connection here, it's not very good, so I apologize about that.
That's okay. I just want to make sure that everyone gets what
But
you're saying.
oh, right, right. Absolutely. Um, so, Mauritania was built in Newcastle at Swan Hunter, and Lusitania was built in Clydebank by John Brown. And so, you know, that's part of why, they were actually known as, Mauritania was known as the English sister, and Lusitania was known as the Scottish sister. Um, But and then, a very obvious example of differences between the two shipyards and their takes on the design was their choice of ventilators on deck. Mauritania had the more uh, conventional, more common cowl type vents, those big old white vents down both sides of her top deck alongside the funnels. And Lusitania had these rather kind of weird, you know, kind of ugly, like they're like drum style. They kind of look like these trash cans, they just like they just had these weird lids on them that you could adjust. That's what I've heard. That I've heard some people just kind of say, yeah, they kind of look like trash cans. I'm like, they're kind of
I
not wrong, really. It's just,
mean, when you're right,
but
you're
it's just
right.
one of those yeah, yeah, but it's just one of those one of those things that again made those two pretty easy to tell apart, and again show two different shipyards and their idea on certain parts of the ship's construction. Whereas in the case of Harlan and Wolf, obviously the Olympic class, Harlan and Wolf built all three. And so they, in that regard, they were um, pretty much all very much identical, except again for a couple small things, but in their main design and appearance, they were practically identical. So,
Well, that was a detail I really liked about the Lusitania and the Mauritania, which is, not to say that there's anything wrong with things being a little similar, but I thought it was a really interesting
uh-huh.
move to send out two, basically the shells of two ships and be like, all right, Team A, you fit this one out. Team B, you fit this one out. You've got the basic checklist of what you need to put in there. Have fun. Bring me a boat, boys.
That's probably basically what it was, really. You're probably right on that one. That's probably what it basically was. It's like, they had the basic, like the blueprint, the basic idea, and yeah, they, as far as like some of the little the nitty gritty and stuff like that, they just kind of did what they felt would work the best. And just touching back on that just a little bit with Lusitania's oddball drum ventilators, um, as they failed, as they aged, and as they stopped working, they were actually replaced with a more conventional cowl style, like what Mauritania had. So that's why you see earlier pictures of Lusitania. You see all these weird little drum-shaped vents. Later, like towards the time when she was sunk, you see a few more of the typical cowl vents on deck, especially the up towards the bridge. You see like a pretty good grouping of them up that way. So yeah, it's just kind of, and again, yeah, it's just the kind of trial and error thing. It's like you try something else, like, okay, well, that doesn't really work, so I guess we'll try this instead. So.
I know there's some people that for some reason are like, oh, the Mauritania and Lusitania are so ugly. I'm like, all right, you can just say you prefer the Olympic class without being rude about it, A. But I have to say, there's one thing where I'm gonna kind of agree with them on, and I don't know why, and this is like the weirdest and most nitpicky thing, but whatever material that Cunard picked for the funnels and then the addition of the little rings on them, for some reason makes
Uh-huh.
them look ridiculously industrial and kind of cheap.
Oh, so you're talking about kind of like the funnel bands, like the
Yeah, the
bands
funnel bands, and then I guess it's
wrap.
just like an extreme, maybe at this, because I'm looking at the Mauritania and the Lusitania, and it just sort of looks like, and probably I'm wrong, but the funnels have what looks like a sort of unpainted appearance, or, just because it's black and white, perhaps it was matte paint. But like I said, it's like I'm not, it's like I'm trying to see what other people are like when they're like, oh, those two are so ugly. I'm like, they're fine, but
Sure.
if it's like if I had to pick one thing out, it'd be like, yeah, those funnels look kind of awful and cheap, but other than that, I'm like, it's pretty similar to the Olympic and the Titanic. I
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
I mean, I
Um,
look, I'm not going to be the person that prints out two pictures and points out all the differences because I simply won't do that. But like, if you covered my eyes, put one of them in front of me, and then gave me like a, okay, which one is it? One, two, cover it again. I might get it wrong.
right. Yeah.
I just might.
Um, yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's kind of interesting you mentioned that though, because I think I know some of the photos you're talking about. Like there's one in
Probably.
particular that comes to my mind is you're on Lusitania's port side, you're up about the area of the bridge and you're looking aft down her port side. And I think I know what you're talking about. Like the red orange part of the funnels looks very streaky and very flat. Like
Yeah.
like
And then when
yeah, like it almost looks
it
like it
photographs with
almost
like a matte
yeah.
appearance.
Yeah, or like it just or yeah, like it just looks streaky and kind of dirty. Like yeah, like I think if that I think that's what you're referring to. Um
It
I
absolutely
I'm
is.
honestly not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure it could have something to do with the quality of the photographs. Maybe it really was actually just a little bit, grimy and she hadn't been cleaned or touched up.
I'd give you the quality of photo
So,
thing, but I'm looking at this picture in 1911, which you might be familiar with because you've probably looked at this and doing your research. It's of Olympic arriving at port in June 11th,
Okay.
1911, with the Lusitania in the background.
Uh-huh.
And you can see, I mean, obviously the
Yes.
Olympic is
Yes.
closer to you, so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is the same photo. These both of
I
these
know
ships are in the
exactly what
exact
one.
same photograph. And even so, in the distance, the Lusitania's funnels look, they pale in comparison to the way that White Star, how it treated their funnels. And I think this goes back to me just be to like the whole like what's important to you and what are your design things. And it's like funnels are meant to carry smoke
Uh-huh.
at the end of the day. I mean, that is their
Right.
primary function. So I can also
Right.
understand why maybe, it wasn't as big of a thing, but I can also see where maybe it was just a thing that White Star Line got lucky with, and they were like, look at this cool new paint we tried out. Isn't it cool that it looks
Yeah.
clean all the time? Like they could have just gotten lucky. But
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
when you're
And
looking for little
yeah,
things to when
I
you're
mean,
looking for these little tiny things to be nitpicky about, it's kind of like you got to get ridiculous, and I'm getting ridiculous about funnels.
yeah. Yeah, sometimes there may be some things where I'll get kind of like that too. And it's funny that you bring this up, talking about how a lot of people think those two sisters are kind of not very attractive compared to the Olympic class. Um, just recently, one of the I saw where someone said that their personal opinion, they thought that whole the second class superstructure at the stern on Lusitania and Mauretania, where the main separates it from the main superstructure. Um, there's someone that said that, man, that just ruins the lines. And I'm sitting here and I kind of like, okay, but I personally, I think it really it's part of what makes them. It's part of what makes them unique. And to me, it's I think it adds to them. I think it really helps. It's part of their looks and part of what makes them look so nice, in my opinion. And of course, you see that obviously you see that with Aquitania as well. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, Aquitania's was more or less actually connected, more or less. But unlike the other two that were pretty much separated by a little space there where the main mast came up through it. But you know, I was like, well, I like I said, I think it really adds to their looks and part of what makes them, to me, what make part of what makes them attractive. So,
It's funny
so,
now. I
so that
have
was an interesting.
never.
I think I was.
Sorry, I was just gonna say it's like I've never actually looked at that, and I'm looking at it now, and it's like I genuinely don't. I know it's there. I know that if I looked harder, I'd see it, but like just to my untrained eye, I don't see a separation, and maybe I'm just not looking hard enough. But I mean, it's not.
There's a well-known photograph of Lusitania on her sea trials where you're looking at her pretty much side on from the port side, and that I think that's a I think that picture is a pretty good example. That's one of those pictures that should really show it, where you can really see that. You look at that picture right about the main mast, and you'll see a gap between the main structure and then the little structure back behind that, which was for second class, like second class spaces back there. But you look at one of those side on views, you'll usually see it a lot easier there.
I see it now that
So,
I've zoomed in as far in as I can get on the Lusitania
uh-huh.
deck plans. And I guess it's just because
Yep.
in my
Yeah.
brain,
Oh
it's
yeah.
not that big of a deal. Like I'm looking at the separation, I'm like, okay, but they didn't
Yeah.
cleave the ship in half. It's
It's just
still
kind of
one ship.
yeah. Right.
They
Right.
didn't, it's not like they did that thing
Yeah.
that they do with
But
extra long city
yeah.
buses where they put the rotational thing in the center. Like they didn't do that. Like it looks fine.
Right. Where they articulate it and joint it in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That would be extremely weird looking, but very interesting. Like, what have you done? We've
Yeah.
created a
But it's
monstrous
it's
ship.
kind of interesting because Yeah. But
Sorry.
yeah, it's kind of interesting because you kind of yeah, you're good.
Or you can
You
kind of
kind of see
see.
that a little bit with Britannic. You can actually kind of see that. That was one of the that was one of her big one of the big distinguishing features about her is that she had a built-up shelter deck at her stern, so that third class passengers would have kind of a sheltered area
Mhm.
because that was typically for third class back there.
Right. I
So
think
then she had, actually had a sheltered area.
it really shows how they were adjusting travel to be more accommodative of all economic classes.
Uh-huh. Oh
White Star
yeah.
Line, yeah, like because with White Star Line, and I bring this up time and time again on the show because I think it's really important to remember that until like 1912, well, 1911 with Olympic, and a little
Hmm.
beforehand with Mauritania and Lusitania, transatlantic travel was not fun. You would bring your own food across all classes. Even first class, in many cases, would expect you to bring
Uh-huh.
their own food and your own bedding. And they called it steerage because it
Right.
was one big communal hall. It wasn't like a tongue-in-cheek
Right.
joke. It was a literal statement. And then they had to re-revolutionize travel, and all of a sudden it was, hey, what if we didn't treat poor people like literal trash? And then they started,
Right.
actually building in amenities. And it's really interesting to see how the conscientiousness for the lower, quote unquote, lower class people is visibly growing, where they're thinking, hey, what if we didn't make the third class people be outdoors all of the time? Let's enclose their
Right.
promenade space so that they're safe from the elements. Like, these are not questions people had used to have. It was just, how many people can we cram onto this boat there, Captain?
Right. Right. No, I totally agree with that. And I think as far as the treatment of the lower classes, of course, as we know, like in the 19th century, steerage, so it's called, it was like, I imagine it was about like living in a barn. It was probably like, they were just like a bunch of animals thrown together.
A barn that
And,
moves.
so they're like basically like, yeah, yeah, pretty much. And like that they lived in such atrocious conditions. And with people getting seasick, you can imagine how awful that was. And you're just like walking around in it and stuff like that. I can't even imagine what it would be like. So I think, that brings up kind of going to the German side of things here. Albert Bauern, um, the 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 head of Hapag in Germany. Um, I think he was at least in part of the reason, part of class going from such awful low conditions to something that was more comfortable. Because at that time, late 19th, like from about the mid 19th into the like first 20 years of the 20th century, immigration was a big moneymaker. That was that was one of the that was one of the ways the shipping transatlantic companies got a lot of their money was from people trying to go find a better life in the United States. And Darwin saw that, and he, I think, to help attract more of them, he started that's where it started making it where it was more like more treating, again, like you said, treating them more like human beings, like actual people, you know making sure making sure they were fed, had a space, a nice place to cross the, and you can kind of see that in the start of the 20th century. Some of these ships, there were people that was that it was even better than home.
Sorry, Carrie, you're really, really cutting out pretty badly, but one of the things that you were saying, which I really want to just repeat for everyone who didn't hear it, was that, as Carrie said, for a lot of people who are traveling in these conditions for the first time, they were being treated better than they were receiving at home. And that's not meant to say, that like, it's implied that something bad was happening to them at home, but Now anyone can go to Applebee's and have dinner. You can go out to eat for almost any
Right,
budget. At the time, going out to eat was
right.
an exceptional luxury. Like people, some people would
Oh
never be
yeah.
able to afford it in their lifetime because you just couldn't save up that kind of money to go eat fancy food. What's wrong with you? We have a family of 7 to feed. And to be on a
Right.
ship where every meal was served to you by somebody, a hot meal served to you, a bed of your own, when many people had been sharing beds or not even living in beds their whole lives. It was a revolutionary experience for many of the working class.
No, absolutely agree. And that's one of the things that, kind of draws me to the Olympic class in general is that again, even for third class, those were some pretty nice accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
People saying that it was better than conditions even at home in like England or Ireland or whatever. Especially because
Yeah,
Ireland, just some years before that had been dealing with an awful famine.
a horrible famine.
And so yeah. And so then, to step onto this huge ship and like you were saying, having these hot meals actually served to you, man, that must have just been mind blowing for some of those people. That must have been a really special experience, like a once in a lifetime thing for them. It really must have been. And I think, like I said, I think that's kind of one of the things that really attracts me and makes to these particular ships and makes them so special to me was that it seems like White Star cared about their customers and the people that would be traveling with them. It's like they tried to make it, make the experience even for poor people something special, something that they might never again experience. And so in that sense, I think I see them as being very um like thoughtful, very thoughtful company in regards to their customers.
I agree. And yeah, I think that was indicative of in the same way that we were just talking at the beginning of this episode, how detailed everything was. And I really, really encourage anybody. I'm gonna post, I think I'm gonna use Honor and Glory as the photo for this episode, just because that's my favorite of your works. That's the one that I like the most. But to anyone who's listening to this, please go and check out the
Okay.
rest of his work. But Kerry, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me about your art and your techniques and your history and sharing all your facts.
Oh no, absolutely no problem. It was really fun being on here. I was pretty nervous at first, but just it really helped. I've settled in. I felt pretty comfortable. I really did enjoy this experience. I really appreciate you having me on. It was really great. It was a lot of fun for me. So
Well, thank you so much. And we'll see everyone next time.